Okay, welcome everyone. We've just been giving it a few moments just to let people join, but I think most of you have joined now. I'm Sam Coe. I'm a family law barrister based in Nottingham at KCH Garden Square Chambers, and I'm also on the committee of Young Legal Aid Lawyers. And so welcome to another one of our virtual events. I suspect a number of you have been attending throughout lockdown. We've held very regular events on all sorts of things, and I'm delighted to chair the event tonight. About careers in legal aid, and we have a fantastic panel who I'm going to introduce you to in just a moment. Just some housekeeping first of all. You probably all know how Zoom works by now. I know we've all been doing it since March. All participants should be on mute. If you've got any questions about our privacy note for remote events, those are on our website. And there was also a link on the email that we circulated, so that deals with all of those issues. We're going to be tweeting from our account. We'd love if you could join us. The hashtag is YLAL virtual. And if you have any questions, if you want to send those over on Twitter, we'll try and answer those with the panelists. There's also a chat box and a Q&A box on Zoom just at the bottom of the page. And I'm keeping an eye on those. So if you have any questions as we go, if you put them in there and we'll try and get to them. In terms of structure, we're going to hear for about 10 to 15 minutes from each of the panelists. That's going to include their backgrounds, their route to legal aid, what their practice is in now, and maybe some tips as well for applications. And then the other half of the event is going to be a Q&A session. So that's your chance to ask any questions you have, whether that's about sustainability of legal aid, how to stand out on applications, what the route of the bar is versus that of a solicitor, practice areas or anything else you think of. So please send those over and we'll try and answer as many as we can. Before we start, a huge thanks from Young Legal Aid Lawyers to One Pump Court, because they're hosting the event tonight and facilitating the remote event. So thank you to them for that. Moving to the panelists then, we have four great panelists who you're going to hear from in turn. So number one is Maria Poleo from Duncan Lewis Solicitors. Hi, Maria. Maria is a trainee solicitor at Duncan Lewis. She's in the law department, also a member of Young Legal Aid Lawyers in the Midlands, so helps to organise events there. And I know she started her legal career in America and provided support in humanitarian immigration cases, so we might be able to hear about that in a few moments. The second panellist is Eleri Griffiths from One Pump Court. She's a barrister specialising in homelessness, asylum and immigration and housing law. And I know she's had a varied background, as most of the panellists had. She used to provide specialist advice at Shelter on homelessness and housing law. Our third panellist is Aqsa Hussain from number 5 Chambers. She's currently a second six pupil in Birmingham, accepting instructions in criminal law and public law matters. And I know certainly what I want to hear from Aqsa is about her pro bono work, because she's the co-founder of Human Rights Pulse, which is an online platform dealing with issues, and she's also a mentor for Young Legal Aid Lawyers. And last but of course not least, Siobhan Taylor-Ward. Siobhan is a member of Young Legal Aid Lawyers, former co-chair, so you may have seen her at events before. She's a solicitor at Merseyside Law Centre, a former Justice First Fellow, and I hope, Siobhan, we're going to be able to ask you a few questions about that scheme in due course. And she practices in benefits, housing and public law. And this year named Newcomer of the Year at the Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year Awards, which we all attended, so very proud of Siobhan from that. Very briefly on Young Legal Aid Lawyers, I'm not going to bore you for too long, but we have 3 aims. We campaign for a sustainable legal aid system. The aim is that provides good quality legal help for those that can't afford to pay for it. We also want to promote the interests of junior lawyers and new entrants to the profession. And the big aim there is increasing social mobility and diversity. And that's why we wanted to host this event. We host it annually. And then finally, we're a network for like-minded people. So you can network and meet other people practicing in legal aid. Now, there's lots of information on our website if you want to know anything more. 2 things I was going to say is we have a great mentoring scheme. So if you're either in your very early years of practice or want to practice in legal aid, please check out our website, your mentor. And that's really useful in terms of helping with your career prospects and any questions you have. And secondly, as I said, we've been hosting lots of these virtual events through COVID. and our next is on the 9th of December. They're always on a Wednesday, and that's going to be a virtual event about inquests. So more information to follow, but please keep your eye out on social media, and those full details are going to be announced very shortly. Okay, so now it's turn to each of our panelists, and we'll hear from them one by one, and we'll then deal with questions. So I think, Maria, could I come to you first, please?
Yeah, that's okay. Hi, Sam. Thank you for the invitation. So yes, as you said, my name is Maria Poleo. I'm originally from Venezuela, but I also have Spanish citizenship, and I got into the field almost by accident. I studied politics in America. I was on a student visa, and in order to be able to stay for one more year on a work visa after graduation, I had to get a job very quickly. And because I didn't think it was easy for me to get a job so quickly, I just started volunteering at an NGO, interpreting for Latin American immigrants. It was a very interesting job. At the beginning, I was only interpreting, and then they realized, the NGO, that I kind of had the skills to be able to do other sort of things until that position opened up, and I became a paralegal for humanitarian applications. Obviously, it's very expensive and difficult to secure a legal career in America, even more so if you don't have any, legal status after, I had ended my student visa, etc. So that's the reason why I came to the UK. Here, I did the GDL full time, and then I did the LPC full time as well, as I was working part time as a legal admin. So that's pretty much how I did it. The one advice I would give everyone is to use university resources, because I was able to get a lot of volunteering positions through the University of Law where I was studying. I did refugee action as a voluntary position for a few months. I also did the National Center for Victims of Domestic Violence, and I also did the Employment Law Clinic. So all of these kind of like volunteering experiences that I got kind of reflected on my CV what it is that I cared about, which is basically representing vulnerable clients. It's been a long road to a training contract. I'm finally a trainee. I've been working at Duncan Lewis for 2 years now, and I just started my training contract now. Now, I don't think that it necessarily has to be this long for everyone, but it was for me because it took me a while to understand that even though we're doing good work and we're helping people, we also have to kind of like show the business side of it. So it took me a while to understand how to properly record my time under the legal aid agency standards. It took me a while to understand how to properly charge for the work that I was doing. So I have no one but myself to blame that it took me this long. Duncan Lewis does have a policy that they will hire you first as a paralegal for 6 months, and then you're able to apply. But of course, you need to apply once you're in a strong position to make that application, right? And I wasn't really in a strong position for the first 18 months because I was still kind of like getting a hold of it. Once you can prove with your billing and your chargeables that you're worth it, then that's the moment when you want to apply. Something else that I would tell everyone is to always apply and to try for your CV to reflect what your interest is. I was very lucky in the sense that I knew what I cared about and what I felt passionate about. I immediately knew it was immigration. I immediately knew it was human rights. So not everyone obviously comes from this position where they know exactly what they want to do and they want to try out more things. But at least in legal aid, if you know that what you care is about representing vulnerable clients, then this is something that your CV can reflect by several different types of volunteering experiences, as well as mentoring programs, because my first position as a legal admin, I got it through the mentoring program at the university. So that's another thing that I would say, absolutely take advantage of it. Other tips would be to be patient, perseverance as well, because as I said, it took me a while, but I'm finally here. Considering I came from a different country and I'm still an immigrant and English is my second language, and all of this random obstacles that can, present in the field, I still managed to make it, So just persevere and be patient. And I think the most important thing that I learned through this whole road to my my training contract is to learn to love yourself and self-care. Because if I realize that if I'm not at my best, if I'm not looking after my mental health, if I'm not being kind to myself, then I can't provide my clients the best type of service and I can't represent them properly. At the beginning, I was just in a rush, trying to battle everyone and everything to get to a training contract as quickly as I could, saying yes to everything, not setting boundaries in relation to caseload or the type of clients that I was picking up or the things that I was doing. And this just took me into a roller coaster of burning out way too quickly into my career. It is a tough career, it's emotionally draining, and starting it off drained out and burned out is not really a good way to do it. So just like keep it in mind, your mental health matters. Just, be patient. It will come when it needs to come. And as long as you're enjoying every day of the career and you're learning every day, then it's worth the time. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get to the training contract.
Maria, that's really great. Thank you. Now, I know you can't stay with us for the Q&A session. So just before we move on to the other panelists, could I just ask, we've had a question in the chat box about in your practice area. How has COVID impacted on your day-to-day work and how you're working?
So I can only talk about what I know, right? So it's human rights, public law, asylum applications. I would actually say we have more work than we've ever had before. Like if there was ever a time that people needed to be protected and human rights needed to be respected, that's during a pandemic. Because I have never stopped working for a single second. We have never had less clients or anything like that. Of course, the day-to-day practice has changed in the sense that I don't see clients face-to-face anymore. So I need to make a bigger effort to connect with my clients, to get them to trust me, etc., because it's just a telephonic attendance. So obviously there's more work on that side, but also more possibilities. Since I can see clients from, well, not see telephonic, from everywhere in England. But in terms of having work, there is work. There's, of course, always going to be, it's an ongoing battle to secure legal aid funding. And for the type of applications that are in scope with legal aid, that's forever going to be a fight with the government and with everyone involved. But for now, human rights applications, public law, immigration, specifically in relation to asylum, those are in scope, and we have a lot of work. I have not seen, a change in. It's actually more work than we had before.
Yeah, I think that's probably across the board in that area, Maria. Finally, then, before we let you go for your other commitment, someone's just asked, if you don't mind, this question. And they're just asking about how competitive it was in terms of the Duncan Lewis paralegal position and how much or what sort of volunteering experience you think's useful when you're applying for that sort of role.
I think Duncan Lewis has like a rolling post all year for paralegals, right? The one thing I do have to clarify in relation to Duncan Lewis is that during the training contract, you don't really rotate as much. Like I will not be going into family law, for example, but it will be more because it's in public law, I will be doing immigration, human rights, public law, and European law, for example, but I will not be moving from the public law department. So if you know what it is that you're interested on, then you can make that application. It's always on for family law, for public law, etc., immigration. So you make that application, and I know that they might not be looking all year long, but when they do have the need, they will look into those CVs that have been sent. And I also know that directors of departments get kind of like a reminder whenever a new CV comes in. So if it calls their attention, they will call you in for an interview. For the types of experiences, as I said, what I had, it was just one legal admin position in another immigration high street firm, and 3 volunteering positions is what I had. So as long as you can get yourself positions, even if it's volunteering, they can be unpaid, but that they reflect what it is that your passion is, that they, and specifically for Duncan Lewis, they need to reflect that you care for people. It's all about giving the most vulnerable a voice. So as long as that's what you can reflect on your CV, then that's going to be a strong. They don't necessarily hire very experienced people. I didn't have much experience, but it's about, showing that you care.
Maria, that's a really useful. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to move now to say hi to Eleri, who I think is waiting. And you're obviously a barrister, Eleri, so perhaps we can got into legal aid.
Sure. So hello everyone, my name's Eleri Griffiths. I practice at One Pump Court. I did my pupillage at One Pump Court a few years ago now. So in terms of my sort of progression, so I went to state school in Wales, as my name and accent might give away. So I went to a state school in Wales, didn't really have any solid connections with people involved in law. I had a couple of sort of experiences at local authorities. I did a handful of mini pupillages. And then I did my degree full-time. And then I took a few years where I did different types of legal work. For example, I worked in a firm which specialised in personal injury and RTA type stuff, and the litigation around that. And then also I worked a little bit in government just to get a flavour of that. Now, in terms of how I got into legal aid and at One Pump Court specifically, I did my BPTC part-time, which enabled me to work full-time. And I worked in a firm which specialised in social welfare law and was overwhelmingly legal aid. In fact, probably exclusively legal aid, apart from maybe a bit of family work. And that was a firm which was local to me. And really the job involved debt and housing casework. It was obviously very vulnerable individuals. I really enjoyed that work. I enjoyed the clients that I was representing. And so that set me then on a path towards getting a pupillage that really I wanted to reflect who I was, why I wanted to practice law, why I wanted to be a barrister, and why I wanted to specialise in social welfare law or aspects of social welfare law, and in particular representing some of the most vulnerable people in our society. I then moved, when I finished the BPTC, I moved to Shelter Cymru. So that's obviously Shelter's sister charity. It's a different charity, but Shelter's sister charity in Wales. And I there was initially a debt caseworker for South East Wales. And that involved going out into the community and giving debt advice in various partner organisations. So, for example, I would go down and set up advice clinics in the food bank, or I would be at the local court. And I also did a bit of court duty advocacy for some of the housing caseworkers as well. So it was a good mix, and it really involved representing people who were very often at absolute crisis points. So these are people who, would often turn up. The problems that they have been ongoing for quite a long time. They come to you and they often don't know where to turn. And so I quite liked effectively being the problem solver, which I think is a good description of many lawyers, but in particular many legal aid lawyers, because ultimately people will come to you. They may not know what area of law in particular, what part of the law they are looking to sort their problem out. And there's very often quite a big overlap. And it's for you to pick apart the problem, find the best way of solving it, and then solve it. Sometimes that's something you can do yourself. Sometimes that involves collaborating with other organisations or other experts in different fields. So a classic example would be in homelessness, or the work I do in homelessness cases. It's for me to sort out the law and the advocacy in that respect. But very often the solicitor will be involved in arranging a support framework, or making a referral to community care advisor, or helping somebody to get their benefits established. So very often there are multiple issues at play. So So after having been at Shelter Shelter Cymru for a couple of years, I then applied for pupillage at One Pump Court. I think, so I started my pupillage in 2017, so that's 3 years ago now, and I specialised in housing and immigration. I had 2 fantastic pupil supervisors who very much believed in developing the profession and helping people out. So I learned a tremendous amount. And I think most pupils, certainly most pupils I know, and if you do a pupillage in or a training contract, or if you sort of develop with SILEX, then and you're doing social welfare law, then you will just be a sponge for, I would say, if not all of your career, certainly most of it, and so definitely the very start of it. So I did pupillage there for a year. The first half, obviously, non-practicing, and the second half then I was on my feet, mainly in the first tier tribunal and immigration cases, and then in the upper tribunal, and then in the county court for housing and homelessness cases. In terms of tips, what I would say is one of the best things about legal aid or working in legal aid is the people. You may get there on ambition to do a greater good, you know, and to represent the most vulnerable, and that might be the reason that you go into the profession. But what will keep you there, certainly in my experience, is the people that you meet, not just the people you represent, but the people around you. It is probably the most collegiate area of law, I think. I mean, obviously I haven't got a huge experience in other ones, but I certainly, you will see legal aid lawyers rally around a cause. And if we just look, for example, at this year and problems facing immigration practitioners and the fees in immigration law, and how the whole legal aid community, as I know it, rallied round, including young legal aid lawyers, in order to challenge cuts to immigration fees. And those sorts of things, you just find that happening again and again and again. If it's not something happening in immigration law, then it's something going on in the family, or something going on in housing cases. The Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year Awards, I think, is another example of where you just see an extraordinary group of people come together from all walks of life, all doing broadly the same thing, which is using the skills that you have in order to, as I said earlier, to solve a problem for people who very often have tried to do it themselves, or have tried in other ways, or get help from elsewhere, and it's not been available. And then they will come to you, and you get the satisfaction, and it is a satisfaction of leaving court at the end of the day having sorted something out. And there is a satisfaction to that, and it's fun. I mean, that's another reason I would say what keeps you in legal aid as a legal aid lawyer is actually, at the end of the day, yes, there are long hours. Yes, you will have days where you sort of sit there and scratch your head and think, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard? But ultimately, you will then have a think about, well, actually, the reason I work so hard is because I enjoy doing this. And so if you enjoy dealing with people who are vulnerable and giving them a voice and representing them, then you will find a career in legal aid very fulfilling. And, you know, a career at the end of the day, for most people, will last most of their lives, hopefully. And so choose something that you love. For me, I got into legal aid. I've loved it ever since. As an immigration practitioner, in particular, but to a certain extent as a housing practitioner as well, you do see some of the worst that humanity has to offer in terms of how people have been treated by other people and by other governments. But you also see the best of humanity, and that is what keeps you going. The strength that our clients have, the strength that we have as a collective group of people representing those, often people that many would prefer, not only that we didn't represent, but would prefer weren't represented by anyone at all. But all of that, I think, are reasons why a career in legal aid is probably, and obviously I'm biased and I'm not apologising for that, well, one of the best careers that there are. So my top tip, I think would simply be, and I would agree with what was said before, is look after yourself. You will spend the most of your time looking after other people. Look after yourself. Don't forget the capacity that you have to do good and to do bad. I was told when I started pupillage, I went to an event at Gray's Inn, and I was told not to underestimate the capacity that you have to hurt other people's mental health by criticising or by being judgmental. And that is certainly something that I keep in mind. When things could have been prepared better, or somebody could have given evidence better. It'll be a career where things don't always go right, but actually we are all people at the end of the day. And so enjoy being around people, enjoy engaging, representing, coming up against obstacles, and you will find it excellent, an excellent career.
Eleri, thank you. It's so nice to hear so much positivity, and it's clear how much you enjoy your role, because I know that when I was looking out at legal aid when I first started in my practice, some practitioners tend to become a bit jaded and are critical of juniors going into this area. And so it's really nice to hear such positive things from you. Just before we move on, one question we've been asked in the chat box is just in terms of securing pupillage. We know how competitive it is. How did you find that, and how did you overcome a lack of family connection to the bar?
To a certain extent, you have to make it. I think that is, you will have to work hard in order to find that gap, in order to get that opportunity. There are so many opportunities now, though, whether it's with the YLAL mentoring scheme to have people to guide you along the way. I would say take advantage of all of those opportunities, university opportunities to get in touch with people. The Inns of Court also do mentoring opportunities. Certainly Gray's Inn did a mentoring scheme when I was preparing for pupillage. I would say the other thing is that on the one hand, having a CV which has got sort of lots of different experiences on there, it is fantastic on the one hand, but the question that it answers for those who are sort of looking at the applications, I think, is this person committed to the area of law that we are looking for somebody to go into? And have they considered the other options? So, for example, as a barrister, can you say why it is that you want to be a barrister, not a solicitor, not a legal executive, or a paralegal? Those are the two questions, I think, which are really important to be able to answer. Now, as long as you get experience, which enables you to answer those questions, whether it is formal in the form of, 3 mini pupillages and a stint with a solicitor's firm or not, I think that is less important, certainly in my opinion and my experience. You have to be able to answer those questions, and all of the experience and things enable you to do that and to make an informed decision about what it is that you want to do.
Eleri, that's fantastic. Thank you. We'll come back to you in due course, but I'm going to move on now to our third panelist, Aqsa, who I think is still with us.
Yes, I am. Hello.
Aqsa, you're a Second 6 pupil, aren't you, at the moment in Birmingham? I am. Excellent. Well, I'm going to leave us with you then. Let's hear about your experience so far.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Gosh, you put me under a bit of pressure there when you said Eleri was so positive about everything, because I might be offering the more, I guess, cynical point of view, just based on my current experiences in legal aid. But I'll get to that in a moment, but hopefully it's not off-putting, it's just realistic. So first of all, it's really lovely to be here. I was a mentee for a couple of years with young legal aid lawyers, so to actually be a panelist now is quite the journey. So thank you very much for inviting me. As Samuel mentioned, I'm a Second 6 pupil at number 5. I mainly do criminal work and also public law work. In terms of public, it's mainly prison law, immigration, and a bit of inquest stuff. So sort of the criminal side of public law, if that's a good way to put it. I don't have a specialty yet. I'm still trying to figure everything out. I know that that's the work that I'm passionate about and I really enjoy, but yeah, just still trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what I'm really interested in, and also how can I maintain a healthy balance between living in a I guess financially sustainable way whilst also doing the work that I enjoy. That's all stuff that I'm trying to figure out as a second six pupil at the moment. My practice is between legal aid and private. In fact, I was having this conversation a few days ago with some juniors, and somebody put it very nicely that my private work compensates for the legal aid work. And I think that's a way that many of us juniors look at it now, that is really the only way. If I do a bunch of these private driving cases that I have very little enthusiasm for, but will still perform my best in court, but that way I don't mind going to the mags the next day for a 50 quid hearing that I might spend 4 hours in the mags on. It kind of balances itself out. But before I go into that in more detail, a bit of background about myself. I had a very STEM background in terms of high school, and almost ended up going to university to do biochemistry, but very quickly took a gap year to discover myself. And I very much did, and found myself firmly planted in the sort of social science world, human rights world. I did quite a few internships and voluntary positions for various organisations, and realised very quickly that that's the sort of work that I want to be doing long term and part of my career, essentially. I ended up through lots of random avenues in Amsterdam for university, much to my conservative Pakistani parents' dismay. But it was a great 3 years, and I studied political science, international relations and philosophy. Absolutely loved it. Came back to the UK to do a master's in more social science drivel, I would call it now, to be honest, just like a more economic sociology. So just being this fully rounded social science person, but without any real tangible practical academic experience. And that's when I decided to do the law. So I then ended up doing the GDL and the BPTC, and now am a pupil. So that's sort of kind of the academic journey into this profession. I think what's probably noteworthy is that throughout university I was always pursuing different opportunities, both pro bono but also paid opportunities. So not only did I do, I did quite a bit of work in refugee centres, both in the Netherlands and here in the UK. Here in the UK, I definitely did stuff, as Maria mentioned, with the National Centre for Domestic Violence, with FRU, other pro bono societies at university. I worked on, for example, the Grenfell inquiry pro bono during my GDL year. And I really just got involved as much as I could to see whether this really is, first of all, the area that I enjoy, which 100% these experiences confirmed that, but also whether I would be qualified enough to do it. And I think obviously the work that you do as a pro bono legal assistant is very different to what you do as an actual barrister, but it's an excellent insight. During those years at university, I also did gain experience in other areas of law, in other professions, and that's something I would really encourage, to not just be almost blinkered into only pursuing legal work experience. I worked in international development, but also strategy consulting and cybersecurity, so completely rogue areas, but there are so many transferable and interesting skills that you also gain from different professions that it's just more flavor to bring to this role as a barrister, I guess. Now, as I mentioned, I mainly specialize in criminal and public law. Love it, love being an advocate in the courts. I absolutely love drafting advices about prison appeals, and I don't know, I really like what I do. So yeah, it is, as mentioned, probably the most rewarding area of work. I think the previous two speakers have also said that. You deal with the most interesting clients, the most vulnerable clients, often at the lowest points in life. So it is work that you feel like genuinely makes a difference, and particularly when you get that heartwarming feedback at the end, and you know you've helped somebody come out of this very precarious situation, and yeah, it just, oh gosh, it makes that 50 quid application or 70 pound trial or whatever it is, it all worth it. So I really enjoy it. I guess for me at this present kind of, I wouldn't call it a crossroad, but I'm almost done with pupillage. I'll be a tenant, fingers crossed, within the next month or 2 months. But for me, I really am concerned about the sustainability for myself. I don't have, family money behind me. I don't have contacts. And I've been quite embarrassed to say this for a while, I guess as a woman, but also somebody who works in the human rights and in this sort of legal aid space, but I want to be financially comfortable. I don't want to be penny pinching. I grew up doing that, and I don't want to go back to it. And so to think that I am getting paid almost, I mean, you know the rates, I'm sure most of the speakers do, that you do get in the courts nowadays. And it's just so difficult in the current situation as a junior, as a very junior, to think that you're going to be able to sustain this career. And everybody says that you've got to stick with it for a couple of years, and it gets better after 3 or 4 years. And I always think, or at present I'm thinking, well, do I have 3 or 4 years to just wait around, hang around and hope that it gets better, and hope that there's some more investment in legal aid? Do I have to keep doing less interesting and I guess less interesting is the word, private work, just in order to pay for this, what is essentially a hobby, because it feels like pro bono work sometimes, the legal aid stuff. And I am just a bit conflicted about that and figuring out how to manage it. And I've been speaking to lots of people, including people in the legal aid, more senior barristers, both at my chambers and across my circuit, but also slightly more senior juniors, about how they anticipate, and nobody really knows what to do. And it's just, I guess, this dire, unfortunate situation we find ourselves in. Sorry, that's fireworks outside my house, if you can hear that. And I am a bit worried. I think my biggest advice would be to find a chambers if pupillage is what you're pursuing. Sorry, can everyone still hear me? There's a lot of, okay. To find a chambers that allows you to diversify a bit. So I think my chambers has been really good at allowing me to do some regulatory work, again, like I said, giving me private work to do, and just bits of PI and stuff that, again, I did not come into the law to do, because I came in with very set goals about the work I want to do and the sorts of people I want to work with. But at the end of the day, in order for me to do that and to live in a financially sustainable way, I need to be able to do some of that, I don't know, representing housing authorities or something, in those sorts of prosecutions against dodgy landlords. So stuff that's, again, not really the bread and butter I would like, but it's interesting nonetheless. I guess to conclude, I'll just really briefly talk about some of the pro bono work that I've been doing. Both previous speakers have mentioned, sorry, I'm really not sure what they're celebrating today, but they seem to be very keen. Both pro bono both speakers before me have mentioned their plentiful pro bono work that they've done, and that's one thing I would really highly encourage people to get involved with. One of the projects that I've been working on, as Samuel mentioned, is Human Rights Pulse, and it's almost a year old now. I think next month we hit our 1 year anniversary, and it's, I think, a very incredible project, because we've got at least 200 contributors from all over the world. These are all people who are either aspiring lawyers or lawyers, young professionals working in the human rights field. So they could be NGO workers, policy workers, etc., and all writing about situations in their home countries or just human rights conditions and things going on. So it's very cool. It's kind of creating this space for young people to just be engaged in the conversation and also write about it in an accessible and engaging manner. Often you find that with human rights, within the human rights discourse, there's a lot of, I guess, exclusivity in the way that the language is used, but also in the way that only certain people can speak about issues. And this way it's almost, I don't know if this is the best way to say it, but kind of democratizing involvement in the field. And so, yeah, very proud of the platform. Almost a year old. We've got 20 volunteers, again, from all over the world who are developing and driving the platform. And soon we hope to be able to become a place to allow organizations from all over the world to sort of advertise for when they need pro bono advice. From lawyers, policymakers, etc. So we are working on lots of different initiatives and I really enjoy it. And besides that, I've been doing some work for the Islamophobia Response Unit, which has been really great. I write for the Justice Gap, which most of you as legal aid lawyers will probably know about, is a magazine, online magazine dedicated to, law, justice, and the difference between the two is the catchline. And besides that, mentoring for young legal aid lawyers. So I think that's me in a nutshell. That's about 15 minutes, Samuel, as promised.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Aqsa. And I hope people will want to look at human rights calls, because that certainly sounds really interesting. I'm going to come back to you at the end because we've had some questions about sustainability and the practicalities of practicing legal aid. So I'm going to park that till the questions and I'll come back to you, but thank you for that. And I'm going to move now to Siobhan and to have another perspective, because we've heard from a solicitor and two barristers, and Siobhan works at a law centre. So Siobhan, I wonder if we could hear a bit about your background and your current practice.
Yeah, so I'm Siobhan and I am currently a housing lawyer at Merseyside Law Centre. I came into law as a mature student. From when I left college, I was a support worker for people with mental health problems. I did that for about 7 years, and I really loved the work, but there were a lot of limitations to it. During my time as a support worker, I also did an English literature degree, and basically I absolutely loved working with vulnerable people. I loved being able to help them advocate for themselves. I loved being able to help them go out and be members of society in a way that they haven't been able to without, or wouldn't be able to without our support. But there were so many limits. So there were things, you get involved in things like helping them apply for benefits and then helping them to appeal the benefits, and then somebody would take over that it was their job to do and they would take it to the court. Or there were issues that came up around community care law, things like that you could say were really, really important, but that I couldn't go any further with assisting them with. There's so many limitations on you as a person that's not a professional. So you're often just looked down on within society as a whole, but also by professionals from outside. So you might be the person there every day organising their whole life and know the most about them, but you're not seen as on a level with, for instance, the psychiatrists or the social workers or whoever are coming into the multi-agency meetings that you set up and run. I also knew that it wasn't intellectually challenging enough for me either, and I knew that I had a brain that I wanted to use. So basically, me and my family, we moved across the country for work, and the job I went for, it was basically the 2008 crash, and I lost my job, ended up out of work, and started to volunteer. I volunteered as a refugee caseworker and qualified under the OISC system. So I worked we ran a conversation club there, so I helped them with learning English, but we also did proper advice sessions 2 days a week, and it was just run by volunteers. But we were doing proper regulated work. We were working with referrals to solicitors and solicitors referring them to us for things that we could do. And I could really feel that that's where you can start to make a difference. And I think from then I've always really appreciated the interaction between campaigning work and being a lawyer. There's limitations to both. So I feel like what being a lawyer is being able to meet for me is the ability to literally solve somebody's problem and make their life better just like that. Like magically you just prevent them from being evicted and they've got a house, or you force the council to give them a house and they're the other house. Or I've done asylum law in the past, and you know, preventing people from being sent back to certain death or torture in another, like that's amazing to be able to see that problem, know how to fix it and then resolve it. But then obviously as a lawyer you have to work within the law and our legal system has a lot of limitations. So policy work and campaigning work is also necessary, I think, for the areas of law that we work in as legal aid lawyers. So working within law centres has been probably the perfect thing for me, because you get to do a bit of both. You don't have to be, I've worked in private practice in the past and that was really good for my development and career development, but I think there can be a lot of limitations on you in private practice. It can be more, they want to mold you into to fit the profile of their firm or to fit the personality of their firm, and they have an idea of what kind of candidate they want, and there's more limitations on what you can say policy wise and campaigning wise in the name of the firm, whereas most law centres at the moment are campaigning in the areas of law that they also provide advice and support in. So for me, working in a law centre was always what I really wanted to do. After working as an advice worker, well, volunteering as an advice worker, we moved back to Liverpool, and I decided that I was going to properly train to be a proper lawyer rather than a volunteer advice worker. And I then started my GDL at John Moores, and I studied that part-time. I had an 8-year-old and a 6-month-old when I started the course. And I was working at Vauxhall Law Centre in Liverpool as a welfare benefits, well, volunteering as a welfare benefits advisor and doing tribunal work. I was really, really lucky to get a job on the Hillsborough Inquest team for a high street firm in Liverpool. So for 3 years, I did that alongside the GDL and then the LPC part-time. So the Hillsborough Inquest team is a really strange first paid legal job to have, because it's so specific and was all 27 people all working on one case all the time, every day, forever. It was amazing, and there's never going to be an experience that's like that again in my future, but it was also not real. It wasn't like the real world of being a solicitor. So it was an interesting kind of preparation. The working with we were representing the families that had lost people at the Hillsborough disaster. So working with those people was obviously an amazing experience, to see people who had campaigned and fought so hard and being successful eventually, to see their strength in the face of adversity, but also to be there for them at their vulnerable moments, which were extremely vulnerable. You know, they're living through hell in front of the whole world. So to see the impact on them, that having good lawyers behind them and pro bono lawyers, because my boss had worked on this case for the 25 years before securing this inquest, and most of that had been pro bono. So to see what the law can really do and where it can get you to. On the day when we got the verdict at the inquest and it came out exactly how we'd hoped it would and how the families hoped it would, there's never going to be another experience that shows you just how much of a difference the law can make. So I'm really lucky to have been able to do that. From there, I moved on to be a senior caseworker for asylum and trafficking cases. And I absolutely love that work too. But it was in private practice, and a lot of it is about billing, unfortunately, because legal aid rates are so low. The pressure on you is intense to bill to a certain standard, and your wages are tied completely to what you're billing, so you're obviously limited. Now the difficulty with that is that you get, most cases are a fixed fee, and they're just the fixed fee, and it doesn't matter how many hours you do until you go way over the set of hours, and then you can go to hourly rate. But most of my cases that I was doing were trafficking cases, or cases with people with mental health problems or issues like that, that meant that they took more time than someone, for instance, from, at that time it was people from Syria. If you could prove that you were Syrian, you were going to get granted really quickly, and there was very little work that a lawyer would need to do on a case. So they were quite good for keeping your billing ticking over. Whereas the cases that I really loved doing and wanted to do, but also was being given to do, meant that my billing was never ticking as high as other people's. And that meant that not only are you working really long hours because your cases are intense, but it's also that you're worried about how much am I bringing home, and am I going to be able to get a pay rise next year. And that I really struggled with the balance of, as Maria was saying earlier, the business side of things and the helping people side of things. And so that, I think, really cemented to me that what I wanted to do was work in a law centre, where I can worry about billing because we've got to stay open, but I'm not worrying about profit level billing where I've got to do 3-4 times my salary. So I heard about the Justice First Fellowship through Young Legal Aid Lawyers and made the application for that, which is also a traineeship, and started that in January 2018. I started at Greater Manchester Law Centre as a Justice First Fellow. My first seat was in welfare benefits, and then at 10 months in, I moved to Merseyside Law Centre and started as a housing solicitor. As I say, working at the law centres, I was able to get involved in things like making funding bids. I learned how to draft funding bids and win funding bids, and also get involved in the campaigning side of things. So within the city at the moment, there's a lot of us working together in Liverpool on the evictions, the Home Office evictions that are happening of asylum seekers and failed asylum seekers. We're working across the Northwest with people in Manchester. We're working with people in London at the Asylum Support Appeal Project, all campaigning together on different levels. So we're doing casework, we're doing strategic litigation, we're doing day-to-day just the appeals that are coming through the door. We're also writing to our MPs, writing to our local councils, writing to the people we know within our local councils, trying to get support for the idea that there needs to be a stay on evictions whilst any lockdown is ongoing. And that's what I really love. I can see a problem in my day job and then know where to go now and who to reach out to and how to start a campaign to try to stop it from happening in the future, or to make it a short-term problem. And I think being part of Young Legal Aid Lawyers has always been really good because of that. So I think I get quite angry and frustrated about how terrible just everything is in the country at the moment, and it's so upsetting, and oh my god, what are we going to do? And one of the good things about being in Young Legal Aid Lawyers is it always gave me somewhere to channel that, where I knew that if we can get the legal aid system and the justice system in a better shape, then that would improve so many things as like a roll-on effect. So I'd think, okay, I can't fix everything, but I can channel it into this report that we're doing, or this research that we're doing, or whatever it is that we're doing with Young Legal Aid Lawyers. So I think if that's something that bothers you, and if what you really want to change things, not just on a day-to-day for your clients, then YLAL is a really, really good way to do that. At the moment as well, I'm involved in a tenants union called Acorn, and again, that's the same thing. So I'm a housing solicitor helping people on a case-by-case basis day to day, but I'm also now in those cases where people can't be helped because it's a Section 21 eviction, where there's no, there's nothing you can do at court about that. They're going to be evicted. we can then pass it through to the Acorn group and do things like block the bailiff, do a campaign, a picket outside the house, prevent the bailiffs going in and removing people. So there's stuff that even when the laws ran out, there's more that you can then do following on from that. And I think a lot of this helps me with dealing with the limitations, as I say, that there are within the justice system. So I think all of this varied, crazy experience is really, really, really good if you want to be a social welfare lawyer, because I think that, as the others have all said, there's so many different facets to these kinds of cases. These clients, they're vulnerable, they've got benefits problems, they might be homeless, they might have a debt issue, they might have an immigration issue, and if you don't know what you're looking for, they can be such overwhelming cases. Just being able to see what you're picking out is amazing. That helps you, you know where to start, you know who to pass them on to, or you can do quite a lot of it yourself if you've got that experience. So as others have said, if social welfare is what you're interested in, then I think getting varied experience is a really good idea. Again, getting involved in pro bono work, but also if you do want to do, for instance, the Justice First Fellowship or a law centre, then policy and campaign work is also really, really helpful, and I think looks good on your applications for those kinds of roles. And was my other main, well, to be honest, whenever I go to talk at any event about entering the profession, always YLAL is my main piece of advice. It's just join YLAL, because there's so many. There's the mentoring that other people have mentioned. I had a mentor early days, and I ended up sitting next to that mentor as an asylum caseworker. And you know, these doors are opened for you just because of young legal aid lawyers, where you may not have, you know, family members in high places, but you can meet those people through our meetings. I really think that helps. And again, these meetings such as this, where else are you going to access such like amazing, inspirational people that we've had through the weeks during lockdown? It's been such a good resource for people and helps get people through and keep the motivation up and inspiration. So yeah, my main advice is join YLAL and get as involved in YLAL as you possibly can. With our campaigns and with our research, it can give you so many different levels of experience that will help you with your future career.
That's really useful, Siobhan. Just on that last point, because one of the questions in the chat box, and I'm sure it's something which a lot of people are going to be asking, and it's about sustainability, particularly in the early years, because we know how low training contracts are, you know, how much you're getting paid to either be a pupil barrister or a trainee. Now, the Justice First Fellowship was aimed, wasn't it, in part to try and keep those roles in social welfare law?
Yeah, absolutely.
In that way.
Yeah, so the Justice First Fellowship was set up, I think, mainly to try to sustain that area of the profession, because law centres just aren't able to fund a trainee. There's the wages, but then it's the time of everybody involved, isn't it? And that person's coming in without the knowledge to be a solicitor, needs training, and so that money is needed as well. So that's what the Justice First Fellowship does, basically, is provide the funding. But also attached to that are these amazing things like conferences down in London where you get training on campaigning, you get training on, you know, funding bids, things like that, the skills that you need as a law centre lawyer rather than a private practice. It's a different business world. So it's about preparing you for what the landscape is really like out there. As you say, it's difficult to imagine how this is going to sustain if things don't change, like just as things are every month, every week. You know, you're constantly concerned about where is your money coming from as a law centre solicitor, because a lot of the point of a lot of law centre work is to do with, as I said before, it's not about making profit, and it's about being able to do these complex cases with vulnerable people and spend the time to do them. And you can't bill loads of money under legal aid if that's how you're working. So then you have to have these other grant funds, which is what
Yeah.
the JFF is helping with, helping to prepare those people once they qualify as a solicitor to understand that these are the ways that you can potentially sustain your profession, basically. So it is quite a lot of pressure, and you do feel a lot of worry in that second year about, is there going to be a job here for me, and keeping an eye out for a grant. And, you know, for me, I did have to apply for and obtain a grant to make sure that my job was safe when I qualified. So there is that side, but also, as I say, I've got those skills now because they were taught to me via that traineeship. So to be able to go somewhere else and get a grant if I needed to, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways, but it is very, very concerning when legal aid practices are still paying 60 and 70 and 18,000 pounds to trainees, because who can possibly survive on that?
Well, that's the feedback that one or two people have said in the chat, and I think we're all alive to the realities of that. Sorry, Siobhan.
No, I was just going to say, absolutely. I think that it is an existing issue that just, one of the things that YLAL was focused on in the past was trying to get the SRA to bring back the mandatory minimum salary for trainees, and they've like point blank said that's not an option. So obviously the Law Society do have a recommended salary, but they've got no power to enforce that, and clearly firms are still getting around that. So it's a difficult one, isn't it?
I just want to ask Eleri, if I can, because Aqsa touched on it when she was addressing us. But Eleri, any tips in terms of when you're starting out? I know there are some scholarships through the Inns of Courts, but any advice you can give in terms of managing those early years when it is quite difficult financially?
Yeah, I mean, so my experience was, obviously I was living in South Wales, and I moved from South Wales to London for pupillage, and the pupillage award wasn't great, you know, and I had to think about that. But so I was lucky because, and I think in many cases this will happen at in particular at London sets. I think maybe in the regions it may not happen so much, but very often chambers will recruit 1 or 2 years in advance, and that gives you a year to do something. Now, for some people, the thing to do might be to go and have a break for a period of time and to gear up ready for pupillage. For other people, and what I did is at that time, as I say, I was employed with Shelter, and I built myself up a pool of money that I could rely on if things didn't go. I say if things didn't go, if things got tight. Now, as it happens, I did survive off the pupillage award, and then in my second 6, I was able to then start earning. And I was quite lucky because our pupillage award setup was that you would have the grant, and then you could keep any earnings that you had. Not all chambers operate the same pupillage award structure, so I think that's important to know before you go into it. Actually, what is it that you're going to be getting, and when, and how are you going to get that? So that's what I did, is I put some money aside to do that. The other thing I would say is that there isn't a rush, and I know it seems like everyone wants to get into the sector as soon as possible and start working to it. But for me, it as I say, I did the bar course part-time so that I could earn at the same time, because I wouldn't have been able to do the bar course, I don't think, had I been, had I had to come up with all of that money to do that, because it's not just pupillage, but it's pupillage on the back of having paid for the bar course. For some people, having paid perhaps higher fees through university. So it's one thing building upon another. So I do think you'd have to think carefully about whether that is sustainable. But there are many options. The Inns of Court, as I said, can offer pupillage scholarships. They can offer BPTC scholarships. There are also things like, essay competitions, all of that, whether the award is £500. I think it's the Law Reform Commission does quite a good essay competition prize. And all of those things, just explore what you can. But ultimately, if it takes you a few years not only to get experience, but to get the financial backing and to create the financial backing. Well, not only will that place you in a good position for getting pupillage and being able to sustain yourself, but also it's just generally quite good as practice for the bar, because at the self-employed bar, you know, this year nobody expected COVID, and I work in housing and immigration. The immigration tribunals closed down effectively, and possession proceedings were stayed. So that was a massive part of my practice. And so you have to be able to manage your finances. It's the ultimate bottom line, I think, which would solve all of these problems, or certainly go some way, is if legal aid was better paid in terms of the rates, which then makes firms and law centres more sustainable, better financially viable, able to offer better salaries. So it's all circular. If you want a more sustainable profession, it has to be from the top down, and the organisations themselves have to be sustainable. So that's what it comes down to. But hopefully those are some tips to try and work towards.
That's really helpful. We're trying. I mean, young legal aid lawyers are trying. Lots of junior barristers and solicitors are trying. And I think any students and trainees that are with us, it's important actually to have support from as many people as we can. I know from being in practice that often at the last minute you get sent these forms to fill out, or you get sent questionnaires to fill in, often with a short time frame in terms of the reality. So I think the more people that fill them out, the better in terms of making those who have the ability to change those rates understand really what life is like on the ground for junior legal aid lawyers. Aqsa, can I just come to you to ask a question? Well, it's a question that a number of people are asking. And I know that you're recently into your pupillage, as you said. So in terms of standing out on application forms, any advice in terms of making the application stand out for pupillage or training contracts?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I guess. So everybody talks about having that USP. What's your USP? Because the reality is, if you're applying for pupillage, at least, you're going to be up against a lot of candidates that all have mini pupillages, pro bono, mooting, have probably done really well academically, done a bunch of essay competitions, as in there's a standard almost pro forma of qualifications that are going to be on an application to even get through that initial sift. That's of course notwithstanding the sorts of unis people have gone to, etc., etc. So there's all of that. I guess the USP aspect comes from the diverse work experience that you bring. So whether that's I mean, you've heard from Eleri and Siobhan, like they have such interesting diverse experience in the legal sector. For me, I didn't have that, but what I did have is all that other stuff that I mentioned beforehand, and actually I struggled quite a lot during the application process trying to figure out how I could frame those experiences in international development or strategy consulting to fit the sort of legal aid work I wanted to do. Because although I could speak passionately about the work I did in those sectors, I didn't want it to seem as if I was so passionate about that I didn't actually want to be a pupil and that I wasn't actually committed. And I had a couple of interviews where they asked me about those experiences, and they said, but you sound so passionate about that work that you did. Why do you want to be a barrister? And I was like, well, isn't that the whole point of being a barrister, that I can be passionate about anything? I mean, give me a topic and I will, make it sound like it's the best thing ever or the worst thing ever, whatever you want. But I think that was my big thing, figuring out how my non-legal experience could be framed in a way that would be attractive to chambers, but also I think what all interview panels asked me about always was that thing that I did that was completely non-legal and non-work related. So for myself, I'm a martial artist. I've been training since I was 7 years old. It's something that I still do during pupillage. I won't answer my phone between 6 and 9 4 times a week. Like, I just won't. I'm training, that's my time. And unless there's a really, really important case or I'm stuck in court or something, like I'll give up a training session. But that's my time, and that's what they all wanted to know about. Or you know, why do you do this? Or convince us in 2 minutes why we should do this. And I think that's the one thing that makes you stand out. And I think every single person has that. You just have to figure out what it is and then how to frame it in a way that makes you seem interesting and not just it makes you exceed the standard list of qualifications that everybody already has.
I think part of it, people forget, it's the first stage, isn't it? Before you even get to the interview, it's the written application. It's a piece of written advocacy. I'm on my Chamber's pupillage committee, and the standard is high. And as you said, there's lots of people with similar experience. So often the first issue, it's not that they've not got the experience. It's you've got 10 people with very similar backgrounds, and how do they sell it to you? And I certainly look out for that in terms of it's a piece of creative writing almost to explain why that opportunity is so good and why, you know, there'd be a benefit to your chamber.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a real skill that I realized the first few applications I wrote were absolute rubbish. I mean, gosh, I wouldn't even give me an interview. But you know, over time you learn how to sell yourself better, I would say. And this is definitely something that as a woman I've had to learn to do more, to own my achievements and to really enjoy writing about them and not be so modest and humble. I mean, don't do it on paper, be modest in person and have some humility in person, but on paper you've got to get everything out there. And that's something I really I had to learn to do. So yeah, it's a delicate act, but I think ultimately when you have pupillage panels reading, I don't know, 50 applications a night per person, they're honestly going to be like, oh, that looks interesting, right, let's put them in the shortlist. Oh, that looks interesting, etc. And I think yeah, figure out what that thing is that makes you interesting, or you've got time to find it. You're in a pandemic, find your interesting skill now, maybe.
That's great, thanks Aqsa. And that raises really the next question, which I'm going to ask Siobhan about, because I think she probably knows from the experience with YLAL. One of the questions we've been asked is, we're all talking about these great experiences that you need and should be taking part in, but how do you get these experiences at the moment? Because COVID's put a stop to a lot of that. Now, from tonight and from other events, we're hosting regular events. Siobhan, on your side, have you seen any of the sorts of events that are being advertised virtually?
Yeah, I can't even. It's so hard. I've had so many people, like, you know, just inboxing on it. What's it called? I can't think of what it's called. The networking site that I can't remember the name of. What is it?
LinkedIn.
Yeah. It's been a long day, I'm sorry. So many people on LinkedIn like asking this exact question, how do we get experience? And so many volunteer applications at the law centre, and it's just, I feel so mean because we just can't give the opportunities that we were able to before. I think the things that I know people are still being able to do are, if you're at university, you need to be going to your law clinic, like absolutely definitely need to be going to your law clinic and just seeing what they've got available, because they're still giving advice, they're just doing it remotely, and so you're obviously still going to get some opportunities to do some legal work if there are spaces left. But also there's other things that the law clinics can get you involved in as well. So even if you think you might be too late to volunteer for giving the legal advice, it's still worth going and seeing what's around and what's available. And obviously they're going to know your local legal scene better than I am. Some law centres are still using volunteers for, and CABs are using volunteers for telephone advice, or also we're hoping to be able to use volunteers to do stuff like blogging about legal developments in housing law or in the asylum law, the things that we focus on, and things that you don't need to be like able to be supervised in person with. But CAB is a good one because I know they've been using volunteers for the telephone lines because they've been inundated. And obviously,
there's lots of CAB options. In terms of other things, I mean, I know some chambers are now doing virtual mini pupillages. It's taken a while to get that rolling, I think. We're doing ours in January. I think part of it's about being proactive, because with social media now, I think if you're students, Twitter, LinkedIn are really useful because these opportunities are being shared on there. So Justice is a brilliant NGO in London, and I know they did a virtual jury trial in lockdown, well, the start of lockdown, I think, earlier in the year, and they wanted volunteers for that to take part in the mock trial and be on the jury. So there are certainly things out there. It might be more difficult, but I think more and more places now, the longer lockdown's gone on, they are turning to virtual things. So like you say, Siobhan, CAB and any sort of voluntary organisation perhaps is a good place to start as well. And I'm just scrolling through, just had a few more questions, I think.
I'd also just very quickly add to that, as a young person in the pandemic situation, particularly when I do, mentor young people, aspiring lawyers and such, I tell them to start writing and just start building their brand, their sort of expertise. I mean, that's the world we live in now. It revolves around Twitter, at least legal Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Start building this sort of expertise for yourself, because that's something that you can very tangibly do during this period. Research about areas you're interested in, and just, it's quite daunting to write your first article that's out there in public, but once you do it, you it's like catching a very nice cold or something. You just want to keep doing it and doing it. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but start writing, because that is something that will build your CV, build your skill banks and your knowledge. It shows research skills, it shows drafting. So yeah, that's something that I would definitely recommend all young people do.
That's a really good idea, Aqsa, because there are more places, aren't there? You mentioned the justice gap. I know places like Amicus, the death penalty charity, they also volunteers for their monthly, their newsletter that goes out monthly. So I think you're right, there's certainly ways to do it, isn't it? It's just being a bit more creative perhaps than normal.
Exactly. If you're interested in the justice gap, get in touch with me and I can help organise that. Same with Human Rights Pulse. I know I'm not sure what the commercial inclined ones are, but yeah, somebody's mentioned Amnesty Pen to Paper. I mean, there are so many opportunities, so just grab them.
That's really helpful, thanks, Aqsa. I'm just watching the clock. I think we've got time for one or two more questions before we finish. I should say, for anyone that's on Twitter, Malvika, who's organised tonight's event, committee member of Union Lead Lawyers, is tweeting on our account. And so lots of the tips are on there of what the panelists have said. And I know Eleri and Aqsa have got Twitter, and Siobhan and the Law Centre are on Twitter as well. So if you follow that thread, you'll be able to catch up on anything. And I think you can carry the conversation on over on Twitter if you've got any more questions or anything to add. Just really wrapping up for the last few minutes, I think. We've heard a mixed picture about the future. We know it's difficult for junior lawyers. And all the panel have really helped in terms of what you can do at the moment and how we can get there, really. I just want to ask each of you finally, really, if you've got anything to add in terms of tips for those that are with us today, junior people wanting to join the profession, if you want to add anything else. I'll come, Eleri, to you first, and you've helped us enormously already. Anything else to add before we finish?
Just one thing I would just add in, just as a practical point, is just because the courts are not sitting in public or in the buildings doesn't mean they're not sitting. And in many cases, especially those in open court, it may be actually easier for a lot of people to actually access hearings and see what's going on. So you can contact the courts in order to get access to hearings so that you can watch remotely from home. So I'd say that's the top tip, especially, as I say, if you're somebody who would be working all day, or and now you're able to work a bit more flexibly, so you can actually log in and watch a hearing or two. I'd say that's definitely something to look into. But yeah, I mean, I think that's about it, really. I think we've heard pretty much from everyone about the tips. It will be sustainable, but we're going to have to fight for it. But the passion is there. We just all have to fight for it and keep fighting for the next generation of lawyers to come through.
Excellent, really inspirational. Thank you so much, Eleri. Aqsa, anything to add before we finish?
Lots been said. I would just say, to kind of add to what's been said, reach out to people. I mean, of course, follow Twitter threads and LinkedIn threads, but don't hesitate to just say, hey, I've seen your profile, it looks really cool, can I have some advice about X, Y, and Z? 10 people might say no or just not reply, but one might, and that's all you need. So just reach out to people and get used to hearing no, because that's what's going to happen during applications as well. So but yeah, enjoy. Good luck.
Great, thank you, Aqsa. And Siobhan, finally, if I come to you.
Just basically for people who have not yet decided about whether to do LPC, BPTC, you're still on your LLB or your GDL, I really think you need to think hard about whether it's worth waiting for the SQE, whether the LPC is the best. Even look into SILEX and that as a different way, especially if finances are an issue. These are things that I didn't know about and weren't available when I was qualifying, and would have really helped my financial situation, because now I'm still in debt years after qualifying, well, after graduating. So I really do think looking into your different options to save money but still get to the same end game. You don't need to run and be qualified by 25. I've only just qualified at the age of 37 last year. It doesn't matter what age you are, as long as it's the most sustainable way for you to do it. We want you to be in the profession forever, not for just a couple of years, because it's just too much pressure and too much debt. So I think really look at your options.
Excellent, that's really helpful. Thanks, Siobhan. Okay, it's a lot to think about, and as always, we could go on for the rest of the night, but all the panelists, and I'm sure all of you have got other places to be and things to do, albeit of course all virtually. So on behalf of Young Lead Aid Lawyers, I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists. So Maria, who joined us at the start and had to leave a little bit earlier, Aqsa, Siobhan, Eleri, great panel, really wide, a lot of experiences, and I think it's a lot of things to think about if you're thinking of joining the profession. Also, thanks to One Pump Court for hosting us tonight on Zoom, and of course to all of you for attending. You can carry on discussing any of these things and asking questions on Twitter. As I said, Malvika's been tweeting the link. Finally, what I was going to say is just, if you're interested, of course, in this career, as Eleri said and everyone said, there's fantastic benefits, but of course it's a challenge. But please join Young Lead Aid Lawyers if you've not already. Our website's got a lot of information on it. You've heard from the panelists about the mentoring scheme. That seems like a really good way at the moment to engage with a current lead aid lawyer and to get some tips. And the three tips we've had, of course, from the panelists is Eleri telling you about remote hearings. They're still taking place, you can join. That must be a great experience for your CV and to get a flavour of what's actually happening in court. Think about what Aqsa said about writing. It may not be the traditional experience you want, but whilst we're in a pandemic, that's a huge thing you can be doing because there are lots of places that will be able to publish those things, and it's another string to your bow. And finally, what Siobhan said about engaging with Young Lead Aid Lawyers and any other sort of organisation, because that shows the commitment and the interest in the area. Finally, our next event, as I said at the start, 9th of December, and details to follow on our website, so please join us for that. But once again, thank you to the panelists, thank you all for joining, and hopefully we'll see you in a few weeks' time. Thanks. Bye all.